My name is Olivia, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the disappointment of my family. I'm the eldest child, which you'd think would have earned me some respect, but in my family, being first didn't mean being admired. It just meant I was the first one to be judged. I grew up in a small suburban town where everyone knew everyone. Family reunions were a big deal. My grandmother hosted them every summer, and relatives would fly in from different states just to be there. For most families, those gatherings were about laughter and love. For me, they were a yearly reminder that I would never measure up. The first reunion I truly remember, I must have been about 16, is burned into my memory. Everyone was crowded around the backyard picnic tables, eating my grandmother's potato salad and fried chicken. My cousin Rachel, who was 2 years younger than me, had just been accepted into some summer science program. Everyone was fawning over her like she had cured cancer. And then there was me. I had just gotten my first part-time job at a local clothing store. I was proud of it. It was my first taste of independence. But when I shared the news, the entire table erupted in laughter. Retail? My Uncle Mark said, smirking as he scooped another spoonful of baked beans onto his plate. So you're practicing for your lifelong career already? Aunt Linda chimed in. Well, at least she'll know how to fold our laundry when we're old and wrinkly. The whole table laughed. Even my grandmother chuckled, shaking her head. And my parents? They just sat there quietly, like they always did, their eyes fixed on their plates. I remember my face burning hot, my throat tightening, but I forced a smile. I didn't want to cry in front of them. Crying would have given them more to mock. That was the first time I realized what role I played in this family. I wasn't Olivia, the eldest child. I was Olivia, the family's punchline. Over the years, it only got worse. Every reunion became a stage where I was compared to Rachel, the future doctor, Jason, the star athlete, or some other cousin who was doing something meaningful. My part-time jobs, my struggles in college, even the fact that I was still single in my 20s, all of it was ammunition for their jokes. I told myself it didn't matter, that their words didn't cut as deep as they did. But every time I left those reunions, I carried pieces of their laughter with me home, like tiny knives in my chest. And I didn't know it yet, but those scars would shape everything that came next. Because there was one reunion, one specific summer, when the laughter cut so deep that I swore I'd never let them humiliate me again. But that part of the story, that was just the beginning of the nightmare. The older I got, the sharper the words seemed to cut. It wasn't just one reunion or one joke. It was a pattern, year after year, like I was the designated target of the family's ridicule. I remember another reunion. I must have been about 21. I had just dropped out of school for the second time. Tuition was crushing, and honestly, I was lost. I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew it wasn't what I was studying. Still, I dreaded showing up that summer because my family always found out everything. We were sitting in the living room after dinner, my grandmother perched on her recliner like a queen on her throne. She always had this way of looking at me like I was a disappointment she didn't quite know how to hide. She said, "So, Olivia, are you, taking a break from school again?" I nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah, I just need some time to figure things out. The room was silent for a second, just long enough for the weight of her words to settle, and then Jason, my cousin who was studying law, piped up. "Figures," he said with a grin. "Not everyone's cut out for higher education. Maybe community college will take you back." The room erupted in laughter. And I just sat there, gripping the armrest of my chair so hard, my nails dug into the fabric. My parents sat stiff beside me, not defending me, not saying a word. They never did. And then Grandma, with her syrupy voice, turned to Rachel. "And how are your medical school applications going, sweetheart?" Rachel lit up, talking about her interviews and her dream of becoming a pediatrician. My grandmother nodded with pride, patting her hand like she was touching gold. I don't think she even realized how blatant the favoritism was. Or maybe she did, and she didn't care. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just smiled, like I always did, pretending it didn't bother me. But inside, something was breaking. You see, being the eldest child was supposed to mean setting the standard, being the example. But in my family, I wasn't the example. I was the cautionary tale. And the worst part? I believed them. I believed I was less, that maybe I wasn't meant for anything great. Every reunion chipped away at me until I started to wonder if my life was just going to be one long string of failures, punctuated by my family's laughter. But there's something dangerous about pushing someone too far. One summer, they crossed a line I didn't even know existed. And that night, I swore to myself that I'd never let them make me feel small again. And that vow, that's when everything started to change. The breaking point came when I was 24. By then, I had drifted from job to job, receptionist, waitress, retail, a brief attempt at community college again. Nothing stuck. I already dreaded family reunions, but that summer was different. I almost didn't go. My gut told me to stay home, to save myself the humiliation. But my mother begged me, saying Grandma was getting older and who knows how many more summers she'll have. So I went. We were in the backyard again. The same setup as always, picnic tables, kids running around, my grandmother in her usual spot holding court. Everything looked the same, but I didn't know yet how much it would change me. It started innocently enough. Aunt Linda asked about my job. At the time, I was working as a receptionist at a dentist office. I opened my mouth to answer, but Jason jumped in before I could. Jason's working at the dentist now. He's not the dentist, of course. He just answers phones. Big difference. The table laughed. Again. Always laughed. Then Rachel, sweet Rachel, the one everyone adored, tilted her head and asked, "But Olivia, don't you ever want more?" Her tone wasn't cruel, but it cut deeper than Jason's mocking ever did. Because it wasn't just a joke, it was pity. And in some ways, pity was worse. Grandma patted Rachel's hand and said, "Not everyone can be like you, dear. Some people just settle." And then her eyes flicked toward me. That was it. Something inside me snapped. I smiled, but my chest was on fire. My ears rang with their laughter. I excused myself, walked into the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I looked at myself, really looked, and I saw the girl they saw, the failure, the joke, the one who never lived up to her potential. And I hated it. I hated that they had made me believe that was all I'd ever be. I cried, not out of weakness, but out of rage. And as I wiped my face, I whispered to myself, "This is the last time. The last time they laugh at me. The last time they get to see me like this." I didn't know how and I didn't know when, but I swore in that moment I would turn my life around. Not for them, not to win their approval, but to show myself that I was more than their jokes, more than their comparisons, more than the family failure. That was the night I quietly vowed revenge. And from that moment forward, everything about my life began to shift. But what I didn't realize then was that changing myself wouldn't be easy, and it would take me to some of the darkest places I'd ever been. After that reunion, I didn't go home the same person. Something had shifted inside me. I was done being their punching bag. I was done letting their laughter define me. But here's the truth. Deciding to change your life and actually doing it are two very different things.
At first, I didn't know where to start. I picked up self-help books, tried journaling, even signed up for random night classes at the community college. For a while, nothing stuck. Every time I failed, their voices echoed in my head. Jason's smirk, Grandma's disappointment, Aunt Linda's sharp little digs. It was like my failures weren't even mine anymore. They belonged to the whole family, like I existed only to give them something to talk about. I worked at the dentist's office by day, and at night, I taught myself whatever I could: business basics, marketing, even coding tutorials I found online. Most of it went nowhere, but then one evening, I stumbled across an online webinar about small businesses. The woman leading it said something I'll never forget. Your biggest pain can become your biggest purpose. That line hit me like a freight train. My biggest pain had always been being underestimated, being the one nobody believed in. What if I could build something from that? I started small. I noticed that local shops in my town had terrible online presence. No websites, no social media, nothing. So I offered to help one small boutique set up their online store. I didn't even charge them. I just wanted to prove I could do it. It worked. And that little success lit a fire in me. Soon, I was building websites for other small businesses, running social media accounts, creating logos. At first, the money was barely enough to cover my bills. I was exhausted, juggling multiple jobs and barely sleeping. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I was chasing another failure. But something was different this time. For the first time in my life, I wasn't working for approval. I was working for myself. Every small win, a client referral, a check that didn't bounce, or a store owner thanking me for helping them get customers, it fueled me. Years went by. Slowly, my little side hustle grew into something bigger. I quit the receptionist job, I took risks, I failed a dozen times, but I always got back up. And little by little, the money started to come in. Not just cover the rent money, real money. By the time I hit 30, I wasn't just freelancing anymore. I had my own business, my own team, clients in multiple states. And the sweetest part? Some of those clients were companies my oh-so-successful cousins bragged about working for. I kept it quiet. I didn't post about it on Facebook, I didn't tell my parents much, and I sure as hell didn't breathe a word to the extended family. To them, I was still Olivia the failure, drifting through life, stuck in some small, meaningless job. And I liked it that way, because I knew one day, when the time was right, I'd show them exactly who I'd become. And that moment came sooner than I expected, because after nearly 6 years of staying away, I got an invitation. Grandma's 80th birthday, a mandatory reunion. Everyone would be there. And the thought of walking into that house again made my chest tighten. But this time, I wasn't coming back as their joke. This time, I was coming back with a secret they'd never see coming. And what happened at that reunion left the entire family speechless. By the time I turned 32, my business was thriving in ways I never could have imagined. I had a small team working under me, contracts with clients across the country, and a steady income that allowed me to live comfortably and then some. I wasn't just doing okay, I was flourishing. But the beauty of it was that nobody in my family knew it. Not my cousins, not my aunts and uncles, not even Grandma. I was still the same Olivia they had always laughed at, the one they assumed was still drifting through life, stuck in some small, meaningless job. And I liked it that way, because I knew one day, when the time was right, I'd show them exactly who I'd become. And so I built my plan. I had invitations in hand for the reunion months before it happened. I told my parents I'd attend because it was Grandma's birthday, but I didn't reveal the part of me that had changed. I dressed the part of the same Olivia they expected. Understated clothes, no flashy accessories, nothing that would tip them off.
I spent the weeks leading up to the reunion rehearsing in my mind how I would handle their jabs, their questions, their pitying glances. I imagined their faces when they finally realized I wasn't the same person they had spent years underestimating. The closer the reunion got, the more my heart raced. Excitement mixed with nerves in a way I hadn't felt since I was a teenager, being laughed at by Jason. But this time, it was different. This time, the power wasn't in their hands. And I knew, deep down, that by the end of that weekend, nothing would ever be the same. Little did they know the Olivia they remembered was gone forever, and the Olivia walking through that door was about to change everything. The day of Grandma's birthday reunion arrived, and I felt a mixture of nerves and anticipation I hadn't experienced in years. Pulling into the driveway, I took a deep breath and reminded myself this wasn't about proving anything to them. This was about finally reclaiming my dignity. Walking into the house felt like stepping onto familiar battlefield ground. The smells were the same: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and the faint scent of Grandma's perfume lingering in the air. The decorations hadn't changed. Even the old family photos on the walls were there, silent witnesses to years of drama and rivalry. At first, they didn't recognize me. Some glanced over, puzzled, trying to place me. I kept my head high, offered polite smiles, and made small talk with distant relatives. But it wasn't long before Aunt Linda spotted me. "Well, look who decided to show up," she said with a clipped smile. "Olivia. Still working at that dental office, I suppose?" I froze for a fraction of a second, letting her words hang in the air. Then I smiled. Not nervously, not like the old Olivia would have, but with calm confidence. "No," I said. "I actually run my own business now." The reaction was subtle at first. Aunt Linda's jaw tightened. Jason raised an eyebrow. A few of the cousins exchanged quick glances, their smiles faltering. Then Rachel, ever innocent and sweet, tilted her head and asked, "Oh, what kind of business?" I paused, letting the suspense linger just long enough for them to squirm. "I help companies grow online," I said simply. "I have clients all over the country. Some of them might even be companies you have worked for." For a moment, the room went silent. Even Grandma's hand, which had been perched on her favorite chair, stopped midair. I could feel the tension buzzing around me like electricity. Jason's voice was the first to break it, though it came out sharp and unsure. "Wait, you have clients nationwide?" I nodded. "Yes, and it's been like that for a few years now, quietly." I could see it in their faces: confusion, disbelief, and maybe even a little envy. The laughter and casual mockery that had followed me for decades had vanished. In its place was silence. And I realized then the most powerful moment wasn't gloating. It was watching them finally understand. They hadn't broken me. They had underestimated me, and I had outgrown them quietly, completely, and permanently. But this was only the beginning of their shock. They didn't know the full extent of what I had built, and they were about to find out. By the time dessert was served, Grandma's famous apple pie, still warm from the oven, the room had grown tense. Every eye was on me, though some tried to look away, pretending they weren't curious. I took a deep breath and let the words I had rehearsed for years finally escape. You all remember how you've always said I wasn't successful, right? How I was drifting through life, never accomplishing anything? Well, that's not true anymore. Aunt Linda's lips pressed together tightly. Jason is brow furrowed. Even Rachel looked uncertain, sensing that this wasn't just another humble brag.
I run a company with offices in 3 states. We work with hundreds of clients, including some of the very companies you've bragged about working for. I've built this from scratch, and I've done it quietly because I didn't need anyone's approval. There was a beat of silence. Then I dropped the second bomb. And for those of you who think my success is just good luck, I also own several properties, including the building where I started my first office. My business isn't just surviving, it's thriving. I'm doing more in a single year than most of you could imagine, and I've done it on my own terms. I let that sink in. The silence stretched longer than I expected, and I could see their disbelief written on every face. Aunt Linda's mouth opened as if she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Jason's usual smirk was gone, replaced by a tight line of frustration. Grandma's eyes widened, the corners crinkling in surprise rather than pride. Rachel, the ever-sweet cousin, finally spoke, her voice soft and uncertain. "Olivia, I didn't know." "You didn't know because I chose not to tell anyone. I didn't need validation from people who never believed in me. I did this for me. And for the first time, I feel free." You could hear the tension in the room like a storm waiting to break. Some cousins looked away, unwilling to meet my gaze. Others whispered to each other, trying to process what they just heard. Aunt Linda's hands were trembling slightly as she reached for her fork, unsure how to respond. Jason finally spoke, voice low and tight. "So, all those years, we were wrong about you?" I smiled, a quiet, victorious smile. "Not wrong, just blind. You couldn't see what I was capable of because you didn't believe it was possible. But now, well, I think you see it clearly." The room was stunned. Nobody laughed, nobody mocked. For the first time in decades, I felt what it was like to be respected. Not because I demanded it, but because I had earned it. And in that silence, I realized something. Revenge wasn't about making them feel small. It was about reclaiming myself, proving to myself that I had always been enough. By the time Grandma asked me to speak about my journey at the reunion toast, I knew nothing would ever be the same in this family, and I wouldn't have it any other way. After the initial shock wore off, the reunion shifted. Conversations were quieter, more careful. People glanced at me differently, with curiosity, with caution, maybe even a hint of respect. Grandma, sitting in her favorite chair, gave me a long, unreadable look. Then she smiled, slow and deliberate, and said, "Olivia, I had no idea. You have truly made something remarkable of yourself." Her words weren't loud or flashy, but they carried weight. For decades, I had sought approval that never came, and now it felt different. This time, I wasn't searching for her validation, but hearing it, even now, felt like closure. Aunt Linda stayed quiet, but I could see the flicker of acknowledgement in her eyes. Jason avoided eye contact, but I sensed he was processing, finally realizing that the Olivia he had ridiculed had quietly surpassed him. Rachel approached me, giving me a small, sincere smile. "I'm proud of you," she said, almost shyly. I smiled back, letting the warmth settle over me. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need them to admit their mistakes. I just needed this moment, the realization that I was no longer defined by their judgment. As the party went on, I drifted through the crowd, talking with cousins and relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Some conversations were awkward, some were curious, but all of them felt different because I carried myself differently. I wasn't the nervous, self-conscious girl who used to shrink in the corner. I was Olivia, confident, capable, untouchable in the way that matters most. I believed in myself. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The warm summer air felt different, lighter, almost celebratory. I breathed in, letting the years of ridicule, embarrassment, and doubt flow out of me. I thought about how far I'd come, about every sleepless night, every small victory, every time I picked myself up when they laughed at me. And I realized something important. Revenge wasn't about teaching them a lesson. Revenge, the sweetest kind, was living a life they never expected and doing it so well that their judgment no longer mattered. I returned inside, raising a glass to Grandma and the family. Here's to growth, I said softly, to proving ourselves in our own ways, and to the future. They clinked glasses with me, hesitant but genuine, and in that moment I felt an unfamiliar but wonderful sense of peace. For the first time in my life, I was no longer the family failure. I wasn't the joke. I wasn't the one they underestimated. I was Olivia, eldest child, survivor, and quietly victorious. And as I left the reunion that night, I knew I'd never let anyone make me feel small again. Not now. Not ever.